I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found. It leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, but still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. Oh, you have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, oh, you paid it all for me. Oh, yes, you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found. It leaves the 99, and I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, but still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, no mountain you won't climb up. You're coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, no lie you won't tear down. You're coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, no mountain you won't climb up. You're coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, no lie you won't tear down. You're coming after me, oh yeah. There's no shadow you won't light up, no mountain you won't climb up. You're coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, no lie you won't tear down. You're coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, the never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, it fights till I'm found. It leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, but still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, the never-ending, reckless love of God.
Hey, thanks for stopping by as we continue in this series as we look at the patriarchs. It's been good for me. I hope it's been good for you as well. So we're looking at Jacob. Jacob has spent 20 years in Haran. He has a family, he has wives, he has flocks, and he's now returning to the land that God promised he would give to him and to his ancestors. And so the word of God comes to Jacob in Haran, 500 miles away. God says, I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back, and I will be with you. So the story, chapter 32, picks up where he's found near the stream of Jabbok, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan River in what is modern-day Jordan today. And he sent all his flocks, all his servants, all his children, his wives, on across and into Canaan. But he has yet to cross over. He is alone. Night is falling, and the Lord has some work to do with Jacob before he would cross back over and into the land of promise. And the text tells us that he's filled with fear, and he's filled with distress over the inevitable confrontation that's going to come with his brother Esau. I have to imagine he had spent all kinds of emotional energy over the 20 years, envisioning this, being afraid of this. Was reconciliation with his brother even possible? Or would Esau make good his vow to kill him for stealing his blessing? So it's night, he is alone, and the Lord has some work to do with Jacob. After 20 years, it's been 20 years, and God has been mostly silent, not completely silent. And Jacob is headed back to Canaan, and evidence of God's presence, of God's moving, is all over the place. First, we read, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." I don't know if you remember the Jacob's ladder story, which happened at a place called Bethel, where he first saw angels going up and down on this stairway that went from heaven to earth and vice versa. And he has this vision of angels the first time when he's on the run, and he's on the way out of the land. 20 years later, he's about to enter back in to the land that God promised him. And he has yet another vision of angels. He's just dealt with a threat from his father-in-law who was chasing him, a guy named Laban. And now he turns around and he's going to deal with the threat of his brother Esau when he goes into the land. And so this second vision of angels, I think, comes at just the perfect time when he needed reassurance. That's a good thing, right? Well, not good enough. And maybe you can relate to this. Listen to what happens next. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau. He instructed them, this is what you are to say to Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban, and I've remained there to now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord that I might find favor in your eyes. And when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and he's now coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau does come and attack one group, the group that is left may escape. And then he prays. And listen to his prayer. O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you said to me, go back to your country, your relatives, and I will make you to prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I only had my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I've become two camps of people. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. So Jacob had also sent ahead 550 animals, livestock, as a gift for Esau. And what he's trying to do is buy him off. So what's happening in this story here? What's going on in the story? On one level, we see Jacob expressing this growing faith in God. Listen to his prayer again. I'm unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you've shown to me, God. That is a great perspective to have as you live this life and as you walk before God. To recognize that the source of your prosperity is God himself. Can you, could you, would you pray that kind of prayer? Or do you think, like so many people do, that any prosperity they have is the result of hard work and because they're smart? And because, they're just kind of amazing. And that's a dangerous perspective to have before God. And the scriptures warn us, humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Why? Because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And honestly, none of us are nearly as amazing as we might think. But at the same time, Jacob, he has this growing faith in God, but he's still the deceiver, right? He's still the supplanter. He's still leaning on the tricky little things that, created an angle for him in the past. He's hedging his bets, dividing this group, dividing his flock, sending gifts ahead, and God can't abide that. And if you could pry into the mind of God at this point in time, he might have been thinking, okay, Jacob, I've spoken to you on more than one occasion. I've sent you angels. I've given you visions. I've made you to prosper. Who are you going to trust? Me? Or are you going to trust you? There's still work to be done on Jacob in his life and character. And sometimes God will allow hard things to come into our life, pain even, that allows us, as we experience those things, to come to the end of ourselves. So we finally learn to lean on God because, we've exhausted every other resource. So the wise person learns to turn to God, learns to lean on God quickly first and not last. The more frequently you learn to do that, the better off things are going to be. Plus, there are just so many things in my life, that I look at and I just go, all I can do about that, Lord, is pray. Because that thing's beyond me. That's out of my control. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And after he sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Well, this story is hard to imagine because we have no categories for it. What do you mean? Are you telling me Jacob wrestled with God, and he actually wrestled him to a tie? Well, it was dark. And initially, Jacob doesn't know who it is that he's wrestling. And it's a good thing it was dark, because if he knew who it was, he wouldn't have wrestled him in the first place. But the identity of his opponent only dawns on him in the midst of the struggle. And there's no way that Jacob could ever wrestle God to a tie. We know that. But have you ever wrestled with one of your kids on the floor? I have. They try hard, especially sons. Sons are trying to test their strength against their dad, and they can just go at it super hard. And I'll be honest with you, super honest, I stopped wrestling with my youngest son, Christopher, when he was 12 and on his way to a 2nd-degree black belt. But when he was 7 or 8, I could hold him down basically with one arm. He would give it all. He would exert as much effort as he could. And I'm sure that lots of fathers have had that same experience with their sons. And I liken Jacob's wrestling with God to me wrestling with one of my kids when they were young. And when the man saw he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let go of me, for it's daybreak." When the man saw he could not overpower Jacob, well, it might have seemed that way to Jacob, he wounds Jacob. He dislocates his hip. This is painful, painful stuff. And he does this with just a touch. And that's not a good thing to have happen to you the night before your brother is coming to meet you with 400 of his men. Not a good thing at all. And so Jacob emerges incapacitated from this wrestling match with God. Then the man said, "Let go of me, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let go unless you bless me." So he realizes who this is now. And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Jacob has come to the end of himself. He's damaged, he's wounded, he can no longer count on his own abilities, his own smarts to contend with his brother who's on the way to meet him. And so with all his strength and all his might, he clings to God and he says, "I will not let go until you bless me." And then a curious thing happens. He's asked his name. Well, he already knows his name, but he asks it. And he responds, "My name is Jacob." Remember what his name means. It means supplanter. It means deceiver. It's not a very flattering name. And so for me, this seems to me like confession. It's almost like he's saying, "Yes, Lord, I am. Yes, Lord, I have been. I've been a liar. Yes, Lord, I have deceived and manipulated and conned my way through life." Names were important in biblical times. They had meaning to them, okay? Not like today when, we just pick a name out because it sounds good. Very different back then. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So God is often in the business. He does this a lot. He right names us, or he gives people new names. So Simon, he gave him the name Peter. Saul, he changed his name from Saul to Paul. And did you know that God might have a new name for you and a new identity for you? This is what we read in Revelation chapter 2. "To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name on it, known only to the one who receives it." I wonder, what's your new name going to be? What nickname is God going to give you? What nickname will Jesus call you by? And here, God renames Jacob Israel. And Israel means to contend with God. And if you think about it, it's like the perfect name for the nation, all right? Israel would have this active relationship with God where they spoke to him and they contended with him all the time. Sometimes their contending was good and well-intended, and sometimes it was not good at all and way off track. Now, if you read the book of Exodus, which comes after Genesis, you read the story of Moses. This is 400 years into the future now. But if you read that book, pay close attention to the conversations that Moses has with God. Literally, Moses' prayers, although they're kind of face-to-face conversations. He's found arguing, he's found contending with God, and his contending and his arguing is very bold. So when he was with God on Mount Sinai, and God was giving him the 10 Commandments, and the people were like, "Whoa, what's going on up there?" He was up there for like a long time, almost a month, and they're like, He ain't coming back. And so they build this golden calf, right? And what does God say to Moses? He says, better go down, Moses. Your people are really screwing up down there right now. And Moses says to God, my people? What are you talking about? Don't tell me they're my people, God. They're your people. Another time, God is ticked off because the spies who are sent in the land don't believe that, they can take the land. So they fundamentally don't trust God. And God tells Moses, well, after all this, I'm just going to kill them all. And I'm just going to start over with you, Moses. And Moses goes, God, you can't kill them all. You can't kill them all. What will these other nations think? They'll think, oh, that God just led them out of slavery into the desert so he could kill them all. Think of your reputation, God. You can't do that. And I think it's very interesting stuff, and it's very challenging to me personally with regard to my own prayers, right? Do I contend? Am I bold like this? What if our praying, what if our contending with God was a little bit more bold instead of being so meek and mild sometimes? Now I lay me down to sleep. We need boldness in our contending with God. And Israel would contend with God all throughout her history. And so when you read the Bible, you'll read Israel or you'll read Jacob. They mean the same thing. Two different names for the same man. Two different names for the same nation. Based on context, one or the other will be used. But God was not going to allow Jacob to re-enter the promised land until some work was done on his character, on his soul. He had to learn once and for all to depend on God instead of depending on his own ability. It was a painful but important evening. He was physically something different than he was the day before, but he was in a totally different place spiritually. And he's given a new name, Israel. And the next day, a limping Jacob meets up with his brother 20 years after he had fled for his life. But when God blessed Jacob that night, he was delivered from Esau. And he ends up giving, this bribe. He ends up giving Esau these 550 animals that he didn't have to give him. Literally taking some of the blessing and prosperity that God had given to him over these 20 years, giving it away to his brother. He didn't need to do this. Yes, he was trusting God, but before his wrestling match, he was trying to still use his little tricks to get by. God keeps his promises. Jacob had to learn that, and so do we. Surrounded by enemies on just about every side, Israel would have to learn this lesson over and over again as she called on God in the face of what physically seemed insurmountable soldiers and armies. The lesson for us, stand firm on the promises of God. Even as you face your worst adversaries, your worst enemies, do not try to appease them. We can count on God. And I think he does invite us into that deeper place. I think he wants us to pray bolder prayers. I think he wants us to grapple with him more, to contend with him more like Jacob did that night. So we're going to do that now, okay? Thanks for coming by.
You're like starlight in not far away, you're coming close. Ooh. And oh, even as I wait, you're coming close. I edited on that. Sorry, that didn't resolve nicely. Shoot.